Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, Elijah McClain, George Floyd. As we begin today our discussion on equity and its prioritization in climate action, as an American, I must recognize the systemic racism that exists in our country, the destruction it causes to individuals, the livelihoods of family, and the livability of cities, as it did for these four and many more. I come to you today from the ICLEI USA office, located in Denver, Colorado. My name is Angie Fife. I'm the executive director at ICLEI USA, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this Daring Cities session, Prioritizing Equity in Local Climate Action. We have a wonderful group of panelists, cities in Europe as well as the United States, who are all participating in ICLEI's Urban Transitions Alliance. Why equity and climate change? We realize that many of the root causes of increased sensitivity to climate change start with inequities in our society. Today, we will hear from these four panelists, as well as from you. Please be sure to put your questions into the chat box, and we look forward to having a robust dialogue at the end of our presentations. I turn it over first now to Kevin from Buffalo.
I'm sorry, can you hear me?
Now we can.
Oh, okay, good. Sorry for that. So my name is Kevin. Thank you so much for inviting me to this panel discussion. I'm very fortunate to work with the Buffalo Sewer Authority on green infrastructure projects. When it comes to collaborative climate planning, a lot of what I will talk about today is about collaboration within our city, but it's also important to mention that we are a part of a regional, national, and global community of people addressing the climate emergency. We are located on an international border and on the shores of the Great Lakes, which is the world's largest supply of surface freshwater. We are privileged to serve as environmental stewards, and organizations such as ICLEI that we are a part of really help us expand our thinking, share ideas, and learn from others around the world. So I come today to share some of our work, but also to listen and to learn from others. Climate planning and action really requires cooperation, working together in concert, and being open to new and creative ideas. I also want to add, as we saw in that introduction, that these are somewhat dark times and our community is up against some very real and challenging issues, and not just in relation to addressing climate change, but in having basic needs met: housing, healthcare, decent paying jobs. We have places within Buffalo that experience a 26-year life expectancy difference from more affluent neighborhoods. We have some areas where over 40% of the population is below the poverty line. Unemployment is rising. Climate planning and climate action can be used as something that brings us all together as that common enemy and common existential threat. It will impact all of us, and this is what makes it an opportunity to address it in a positive light and in a way that uplifts everyone, and especially our most vulnerable and historically underserved or marginalized communities. Planning and implementing climate actions do not need to be a burden. We do not need to sacrifice in order to do what is right. We can simultaneously reduce our greenhouse gases while investing into our most valuable assets, which is, of course, our people. So how do we best serve our community when it comes to climate planning, and how can we make sure we are doing it in an equitable way? So for today's discussion, I'd like to talk about our Rain Check initiative. This is a Mayor Byron Brown effort to take on the climate emergency with nature-based solutions. Launched in 2015, this initiative has planted thousands of trees and over 600 acres of green infrastructure, and involved collaborations with several local nonprofits, local government agencies and departments, academic institutions, researchers, and NGOs. The initiative itself is a collaboration between Buffalo Sewer Authority and the City of Buffalo, but leverages other partnerships to expand our reach and capabilities. We recently undertook a detailed look at our city to understand where we might implement nature-based solutions that will have the greatest positive impact on people, and especially those from historically underserved or marginalized communities. We looked at both socioeconomic factors as well as built environment factors, and found disparities in the conditions throughout our city. Patterns emerged, and we saw some areas where investments would have a greater impact, shown here in the darker blue color on the map. This work was guided by a technical advisory committee, which was made up of local community organizations, residents, academic researchers, and local government partners. Together, we identified and prioritized areas that had the most need for investment and support. Taking this data first approach further, Buffalo Sewer is working in close collaboration with the City of Buffalo, as well as academic researchers, to complete a climate change vulnerability assessment. We expand on the Rain Check equity index factors to investigate various systems for their sensitivity to, as well as their adaptive capacity to climate change, with a particular focus on socially vulnerable populations. Being able to identify who is most vulnerable and where will allow us to further tailor and customize our planning and delivery. From the prioritization of implementing nature-based solutions in places where it is anticipated to have the greatest impact, we need to continue the equitable planning of project specifics. The top-down approach needs to be coupled with on-the-ground knowledge and input from community members and local stakeholders. The vulnerability assessment and equity index are very much a first step in the process. And after we do this initial analysis, we need to open up the discussion more widely to everyone in our city. Do we have the right set of things to look at? Are there others we should assess and include? Are some more important than others? Are the assessments on vulnerability accurate? These are some of the questions that need further discussion with community members. And this exercise is really for us to bring something to the table in order for us to have that discussion. In our work on implementation, we lead community vision walks where we organize members who live in an area to walk around their neighborhood with us and communicate what their vision is for their community and how we might leverage our investments to best serve them. Reducing greenhouse gases and making the physical landscape more resilient to climate change is great and is needed, but we can go much further in seeing our work support residents' vision and ambitions for their surroundings. We listen first and then find ways to deliver projects that are mutually beneficial. The input that the community gives us cannot be a one-way transaction. We have to leave something behind and offer something in return for their support. One of the ways we can do this is to think more holistically about how we do our work. Every project we work on is an opportunity to connect with residents, build relationships and trust, and invest in our people. As a part of one of our construction projects to increase green space and make our infrastructure more resilient to climate change, we had a summer youth program take place in parallel. Kids from the surrounding community took part in sessions throughout the summer to learn about environmental sustainability, be introduced to STEM fields and career opportunities, and co-design a few small rain gardens. The resulting site they co-designed was designed and constructed by these kids, and today the site is really an asset that the community owns. This isn't our infrastructure that was imposed on you. It is something that came from you and by you. In some ways, this is the Buffalo Sewer Authority facility since it is functioning as a stormwater management practice. However, the community that lives around here are the ones who ultimately have ownership over this space, and we are there to simply support them. Getting participation in our planning of climate action is going to need creative approaches. We are looking to do community events, workshops, listening sessions, visioning sessions, training and education, and more. We need to build on other efforts to distribute food and PPE. We need to partner with other organizations and make extra efforts to include those who are historically underserved or marginalized. With COVID-19, we are seeing some challenges to getting meaningful engagement with the community, and I just wanted to briefly touch on a way that we're trying to do that. Climate action takes collective action, and we are always looking for new and creative ways to include everybody. The City of Buffalo is undergoing a parks master planning process, and as part of that engagement are looking to create an activity book for families. With many people and families stuck at home, this offers something to not only have fun with, but also as a way to get input and feedback on potential projects and programs. Design your own park, identify areas with flooding, learn more about your city and what you can do. And finally, I want to briefly talk about our environmental impact bond. Anticipated to close in December, this will be the largest and first of its kind impact bond where interest payments and cost of capital are directly tied to measurable impact. The funds will be used exclusively for nature-based green infrastructure solutions and will feature robust data disclosure, third-party verification, substantial metric tracking over time on both environmental and community impact key performance indicators. Funds will be used to create a grant program to incentivize retrofits on private property in order to complement projects within the street right away. This is our way of putting our money where our mouth is and tying our commitment at the finance level. We are very much at the early stages of climate planning and have been doing the higher level planning work in parallel to actual implementation, as we do not have the luxury of time when we are in the middle of a mass extinction. These are very exciting times to be in Buffalo, and we see climate planning and climate action as not so much a challenge, but as an opportunity, and we are capitalizing on it in ways to uplift the most underserved and vulnerable communities. Thank you so much for having me today, and I look forward to hearing from the other panelists in the discussion.
Thank you so much, Kevin. I'm always inspired by Buffalo because you're working out of the sewer authority. You're not within the mayor's office. You're not a special office working on sustainability or climate. And so I'm always inspired by the way that you are integrating this climate work into the work as the sewer authority. So thank you for all that you do. I would invite Duncan at this moment to intervene if there's anything you'd like to follow up on based on what Kevin just had to say.
Thank you very much, Angie, and hello everyone on this call. Greetings from Glasgow, proud host city for COP26, and I look forward to welcoming everyone in November of next year, of course. Kevin, thanks so much for that presentation. It was really inspiring. I think the things that really came across for me were the actual specifics of the Rain Check initiative. The fact that you had a climate change vulnerability assessment attached to it is so good, because we can't do these things after the fact. They need to be part and parcel of our planning and incorporated in an equality sensitive approach. That was really inspiring. And I was also reminded that in many ways, the great thing about our cities is that we're innovators. We are the crucibles where ideas and innovation take place, even if we don't forge metal and steel the way once we did in our great places. And that innovation needs to take place not just in technology and some of the nature-based solutions that you've been talking about with the Rain Check initiative, I think, but also around finance. And therefore, your environmental impact bond was really interesting, and governance. How we organize ourselves as cities to achieve the social objectives around equality, inclusion, and sustainability is vital. Just one final thing, and maybe a reflection as much as anything on your introductory remarks, Angie. We are in the extraordinary situation of having 3 overlapping crises around COVID, climate, and racial injustice. And for all of our cities, we have a role to play. And here in Glasgow, we're very mindful not only of our local responsibilities, but globally to acknowledge our role over the years in the slave trade and what part of the British Empire meant in terms of putting lines on other people's maps, particularly in Africa, climate-related conflict. So thanks very much, Kevin. I'll stop at that point, Angie.
Thank you, Duncan. Appreciate that. Excellent. Well, it's my pleasure now to welcome Grant Irvin. Grant, over to you.
Thank you, Angie. And Ying, do you want to bring up a slide? There you go. So thank you very much. It's just a real privilege to be here with everyone, and a privilege to share some of the work that we've done in Pittsburgh under our One Pittsburgh Resilience Strategy. So I'm going to run through a handful of slides with regards to some of our resilience and climate work, and just kind of share with folks the importance of decision support tools that we've been integrating and trying to leverage as we try to integrate better activities related to climate and equity work. Next slide. One of the key things that we took shape as we developed our resilience strategy was a deep and engaging community listening process using tools of deliberative democracy. You can see a picture up there on the right-hand side as we created what was called our preliminary resilience assessment. And those community listening sessions, coupled with kind of standardized data that many cities have, allowed us to formulate a shock and stress profile. And one of the things that's really critical to understand as we pull this information together was the role of climate and extreme weather and the role of systemic inequality and how that played a major factor in undermining kind of the resilience of the city of Pittsburgh. Next slide. And over the course of the last few years, we've built on those tools, first with the preliminary resilience assessment, then our 1PGH resilience strategy, but have subsequently followed that up with a couple of very critical kind of decision support tools that are based on these concepts of equity. We were a part of a cohort of 4 other cities that worked on the development of the equity indicators, an 85-piece data set that along with Tulsa and St. Louis and Oakland. The city of Pittsburgh worked with the Rockefeller Foundation, the City University of New York, to create this equity lens for the first time. And what's important about that is that this was city government doing this. There's often kind of NGOs or university research studies that come out, but we wanted to take a deep introspective look into the service profile of city government and how it ultimately affects this issue of equity. Next slide. And one of the things that was really important about that is it started to help us identify when we hear the issues equity, that is, like sustainability and resilience, a big word that has a lot of connotations that are incorporated in it. And so as a policymaker and as an agency that invests hundreds of millions of dollars a year in services and infrastructure, we really wanted to understand how can we fundamentally address and shift the paradigm with regards to equity in our community. And you see there in the red boxes, the places where we see the largest disparities between white and Black population in Pittsburgh. So the issue, I'll pick one here, the issues of childhood health and well-being, being one of the most major concerns in terms of understanding poor health outcomes of vulnerable African-American children. If you're an African-American boy in the city of Pittsburgh, you have a higher propensity of having the chance of having asthma. And that is one of those things that both as an environmentalist, but also as a policymaker, we want to understand so we help to solve that challenge. Next slide. And so we started to take this information a bit further in terms of understanding how the climate crisis is playing out in these different issues and areas of inequality. And what we started to see, and what's interesting about climate and particularly the adaptation conversation for us in Pittsburgh, is that we completed our Pittsburgh Climate Action Plan in 2017, which was one of the recommendations coming out of our resilience strategy. And in the midst of developing a mitigation plan to reduce the impacts of CO2 in the environment, we were also starting to rapidly feel the effects of climate change in terms of precipitation, in terms of inversions, in terms of landslides and disruptions across the city. And I'll hit upon that across some of the next slides. And what we started to see is the why to this question, these confluences between inequality and what we as city government do, the services that we provide, the infrastructure that we build, and how that starts to come together. Next slide. Over the next couple visuals here, the next slides, I want to go through these relatively quickly for folks, but effectively what we've been able to do is to start to map environmental justice areas against our equity indicators report. So seeing this piece that you see on the text side of the slide here is the areas within our equity indicators that we raise, and then the mapping shows where these issues start to play out. If you're familiar with Pittsburgh, the majority of the pink area is the city of Pittsburgh. And so we're experiencing all of these issues, whether it's asthma, hospitalization rates, or declining rates of home ownership, are all starting to play out across the city neighborhoods. Next slides. So this starts to play out in the face of the loss of tree canopy, which you see in kind of the yellow areas, increased surface temperatures, which you see in the red areas. And these little boxes of red and yellow, these are some of the most vulnerable populations in the city of Pittsburgh. So predominantly kind of low and moderate income neighborhoods that don't have the environmental assets to help bolster themselves against some of the climate challenges we're facing. Next slide. So aspects of heating, we've seen just, this past year, 3 straight weeks of 90+ degree temperatures, extremely hot for the Pittsburgh region. And what this does is put a great strain on some of the services that we provide, such as heating and cooling centers. So these huge temperature shifts are major challenges for us. Next slide. This again kind of shows those same areas and the racial breakdown. So not only are they low and moderate income communities, but also predominantly these are where African American populations are residing in the city of Pittsburgh. Next slide. Going back to the issues of asthma, one of the major challenges that we experience in Pittsburgh is the issue of poor air quality. And this has been a traditional challenge of Pittsburgh going back to the days of heavy industry. But one of the things that's been unique is even in the decline of industry, so we've lost steel manufacturing and major industrial concerns that were the hallmark of Pittsburgh and in the heart of the city center, yet we have continued to maintain poor air quality. And this issue has been exacerbated. Some fundamental issues reside both because of topography and geography, where we are positioned and kind of airflow. But one of the things that's been interesting has been the challenges because of increased rates of mobile point source pollution, but also the rates and increases of inversions. You go to the next slide, please. So one of the challenges that we've seen in Pittsburgh from the climate crisis has been inversions, basically kind of low pressure systems that sit over top of the city and compress the air and pollution over the city. So it doesn't have the ability to go up and out and disperse. Instead, it stays trapped in the bowl in the valley. So much like folks might be familiar with Mexico City or Salt Lake City, where it sit in the middle of a basin, very similar in Pittsburgh. And what this does is exacerbate those health challenges. So going back to the African-American boy who has asthma, these inversions are major triggers in terms of those health events. Next slide. You can keep going. So these rates of inversions have been increasing, which has been one of the interesting things that we've started to note with our data. So the number of inversion events have been trending up, which is basically an accelerant in terms of some of the climate challenges that we are now facing. Next, please. And again, so this shows those asthma hospitalization rates. And so this is how equity and climate, really the pictures start to blend together in terms of the challenges. Many times we see them as two separate issues, but they're very integrated in terms of what we're seeing in the face of the data and the real physical challenges. Next, please. Another part of the picture has been the increases in precipitation. So something that Kevin would probably readily connect with from the Water and Sewer Authority side is that in our region, we have seen almost double the amount of precipitation that we normally receive. And Pittsburgh is a pretty wet area to begin with. So, those years, particularly 2018, 2019, wasn't just an abnormal event. It's becoming the new normal event that we are seeing. Next slides. So this is a quick little mapping exercise that we were able to do with our 311 center. So this is kind of the resident intake. So folks looking for city services or looking to file a complaint. So each of those purple dots that you see, the purple and red dots, are different incidents of stormwater runoff. And so these are not abnormal that we have these issues, but what is abnormal is the increase in the rate and the number of these events and these incidents that residents are reporting. Next, please. You can go to the next slide, please. It just goes to show the increase in the number. And one of the things that we've experienced because of that increase in precipitation now has been the increased incidence in the number of landslides. So if you've ever had the experience or the pleasure to visit us here in Pittsburgh, you'll note that we have many kind of green and lush hills and valleys. And what we have seen is those hills and valleys start to slide down in large part because of the soil being unstable because of the amounts of precipitation. Next. And I just want to kind of finish up here with where we're kind of taking this data now. Next slide, please. So, just connecting kind of the dots from the resilience strategy to the equity indicators to starting to look at kind of the climate impacts, we're now trying to find the ways in which to blend and bind it together. And one of the key aspects that we've been using has been the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And one tool that we'll be creating and releasing in the next couple of weeks is, along with our partners in New York and Los Angeles and a handful of other European cities, we've started to develop our own voluntary local review. So basically taking the 17 global goals and using that as a way to improve communications across departments and across sectors, but also to start to look for cross-collaboration opportunities. Next slide. And what we're looking to, if we go to the next slide, please. And what we're looking to do is now starting to connect that information using kind of the decision support tools from the equity indicators, the framework of the SDGs, the lens of resilience, and starting to apply that into our budget decisions. So now starting to have conversations with other departments and understanding how this climate and equity, these twin crises that Duncan spoke of, how these twin crises of climate and equity can be addressed through the city budget. So the idea that we've had to increase landslide and flooding into investments in 2019 is taking away from other investments in city services. You have a finite amount of resources, so how do we allocate that and solve those challenges? So basically trying to create more intelligence and business intelligence into our budget process. Next slide. Go to the next slide, please. And so just to kind of wrap up here, so what we're now trying to do is, if you can recall from earlier in the presentation, those indicators of inequality, the challenges of climate, the physical manifestation of it, how can we leverage our city budget resources to create co-benefit opportunities, to basically tackle those challenges of equity or inequity and climate collectively? And do that in both a spatial and a human context in terms of city services. The final thing I'll lead is also trying to leverage other financial resources. So Kevin mentioned the climate bonds. Some of the things that we're trying to do in connection with that is also levying new resources of taxes, as well as other funding sources from other agencies. So Pittsburgh recently passed and approved through a voter referendum a parks tax, to basically increase our investment in these open and natural spaces and connect people to nature. So using kind of the 10-minute walk score from the Trust for Public Land as one of our guideposts, and also using and leveraging kind of investments from federal agencies like the Army Corps of Engineers, and then Alcosan, our Water and Sewer Authority, to basically bind those resources together in a way that can leverage investment and tackle these twin challenges. Thank you.
Thank you, Grant. Thank you so much for walking us through your process. It was great to see the progression from data to planning to the connection with global goals, and of course, that all-important budget and finance piece that comes along. And thanks, of course, to Mayor Peduto, who's such a great champion, and for always being willing to step up and speak about the great work that you're doing in Pittsburgh. We are delighted to offer next year at ICLA USA a learning cohort for a group of cities who wish to also undertake a voluntary local review. So we will look with great interest to your results and probably invite you to come and speak about that. So thanks for what you're doing there. Before we turn it over to Lisa, we did have a question from our audience, and it's for both Kevin and Grant, and I'm sure Lisa as well. The question is, we're involved in stakeholder engagement here. How do you manage expectations? Because of course, not every bit of input that you receive from your community members is actually going to be operationalized. So how do you manage that sort of dynamic?
I'll jump in because I forgot to mute myself. So, one of the key things I think is, and it's definitely a challenge, and we can always, anytime I have a conversation around community engagement, you have to start with saying you can always do better. And I think one of the things that we have attempted to do, particularly in these issues, is to manage and have continuous stakeholder engagement. One of the things that we've been able to do with our resilience strategy in particular is the steering committee and a lot of the focus groups that we engaged early on have stuck with us. And that has been, I think, a benefit of always, one, kind of leveraging their expertise and their experience, but also they are then apprised of the challenges and the impediments that ultimately always arise, right? So that's one thing that I think has been a benefit to us. One of the challenges, and we're actually just kicking off a project with Carnegie Mellon's Policy Innovation Lab, is trying to develop a more forward approach in terms of project dashboards. So basically creating more amounts of transparency to measure kind of progress over time. One of the things, and I was giving this talk yesterday about this, is just in the span of 6 years that I've at least been in city government, we have seen the period of the going from the data desert to the data oasis. And so there's more and more information available in greater frequency. That doesn't always mean that it is good data, because we have to sift through it, and there's a lot of dissonance that is engaged in that. So trying to kind of show progress, I just think about kind of like hearing Kevin talk about the amount of acres of green infrastructure that they have installed, right? Like, so that one point in time that was 0, right? We've been doing, and now you're up to like 400 acres. We're seeing like the same thing just with like electrical vehicle conversion is a good example for us. 3 years ago, we had 0 electric vehicles. Now we have 35 in our fleet. So it's kind of showing that progress over time, I think, helps create accountability within local government, but also show that there is, even through all the muck and mire and the challenges that we face, there is progress and a positive trajectory of things.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Grant. Would any of the other panelists like to come in on that question, or shall we turn it over to Lisa?
Sure. And I don't know if I have the best response. I think Grant did a really awesome job there. It is hard to manage expectations. This is something we face, every day, essentially. Having those relationships and those connections, even if we're not actually going forward with what a particular community member really wanted to see, but still leaving that open door policy. Let's still talk about it. Maybe there's something else where we can, do something else to try to keep as many people happy as possible, but certainly recognizing we can't keep everybody possible, and we have very real targets and goals to meet. And we don't have the luxury, again, of making sure that everybody can get everything that they want, although we do try to do the best we can. I also think it's important just to have that presence in the community and that kind of ongoing relationship that stays over time. It's just very valuable to build trust in the community.
Great, thanks, Kevin. All right, Lisa, let's turn it over to you. I'll note for our audience that Lisa indicated that she had a little bit of an internet instability going on. So if she needs to turn off her camera or if we have some interruptions, apologies in advance, but turning it over to you, Lisa.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for the excellent presentations, and thank you for having me. I'm actually taking a little bit more kind of a narrow approach of our tools of mapping social equity in our interventions and in our actions. And actually my answer to the previous question would have actually also been that we have, for instance, with participatory budgeting, we have noticed that it's super good to manage the expectations that there's always somebody, like Kevin, you said, there's presence. So we have the amount of money we are allocating, then we are saying it quite clearly, okay, what district and why this district now, which districts are coming later, and then what actions are actually applicable for this money. So there's all the time somebody answering, you can you can introduce some action project if you want to have a swing in your neighborhood, and then they would answer right away, this is applicable or not, and then people can vote. So these tools are helping us, because all other ways we will be overflooded, as you know. Okay, so I started with answering this question, and now I will go more into detail with my topic now. So I didn't introduce myself. I'm Liisa. I'm from Turku, Finland, and I'm the project manager for the Circular Turku project here. And sorry, I'm kind of looking both ways because my slides are there and you guys are there, so don't mind me. Okay, and my presentation, I'm actually introducing you guys something that is still not finished. So, and I'm actually looking forward to some feedback for that. So bear in mind, it might get a bit messy at some point. So just hold on to your hats as we go. Okay, so first I'm gonna lay you the basics of like what is our approach here in Turku about social equity and social inclusion. Then I'm gonna present the mapping tool and tools. And then I'm gonna talk a little bit about our challenges and developments ahead. So to start with, it says in our climate plan that everybody has the right to be involved in this climate work. And it says it quite in the beginning of the climate plan. It's not kind of in the end, like hidden somewhere. And another thing, it says important thing for the social inclusion and social equity, it says that one tool for climate-proof society is supporting the sense of community. So that's our mandate. That's our kind of, we need to do this work. And then, okay, so what is my project now? Circular Turku. So Circular Turku is a circular economy roadmap for the area that will take us towards resource-wise society. We are doing this with ICLEI. I'm so happy about this collaboration. I could not do this without you guys. But we are doing it with the Finnish Innovation Fund Sitra and local partners and stakeholders. So the collaboration here is a big thing and key. And we have a target to become carbon neutral by 2029. And we have actually got half of our emissions this year. We are ahead of our path to climate neutrality and to become climate positive thereafter. But now comes the tricky part. As a city, we have done the things that we can do, and now more and more we need the supporting community with us, the individuals, the communities, and the companies to do this work. So we have to be even more considerate of the inclusion and social equity parts. So, and we see, one thing I want to highlight is that we see circular economy as a tool. It's a tool for doing the things we already are doing better and doing them in more diverse way and more inclusive way. Then we work with 5 priority teams: food and nutrient cycles, energy systems, building sector, transport and logistics, and water. So we are going into the actions from the thematical approach. And our aim is to get significant circular economy interventions that will like shift our society towards resource wisdom. They need to be action oriented and city led. So meaning that we are acknowledging our role in implementing these actions and interventions. And at the same time, we are inspiring other actors in the area to see their role and to also kind of push us further in this work. Okay, so now we get to the kind of more in the social equity bit. So when we come with, take the social equity, I have still this slide from ICLEI, you might see it. So social equity, bit kind of vague concept. Then we add circular economy, bit vague, multidimensional complex concept. So what we end up with easily is a headache. So what we need, like, in order not to get this headache, so what we need to understand as a basic, I think, when we go into these interventions and in this like actual work that we do, and this engineer work as well, is that social equity is everybody's business. It's not the business of a particular like sector of the city. It's everybody's business. Everybody, like, I'm an engineer, I'm doing this project manager work. I need to be considering about social equity. I need to inspire everybody else to consider it as well. And if we manage to include the kind of the idea that people even start to think, social equity might be important in this engineering job that I'm doing, then we are already quite far ahead. And as this is a complex issue, we need to simplify it enough to get started. Then we can kind of go more into nuances and more into details and stuff. Because as you know, otherwise we can get, and because it's so sometimes there and we are talking about people and like really like for instance, structural racism, it can get super, it can get that people don't act anymore, that they get like, okay, I cannot do anything because I cannot serve all of the different aspects of social equity. So we need to kind of dissect it in order to get started and actually inspire people to think of it and not be like, okay, I'm not going to think of it because it's so big issue. So what is our, as I said, solution is keep it simple. So with ICLEI, we have kind of narrowed social equity to these 3 different words: access, participation, and opportunity. Then we match our thematic approaches to this. So I have 2 examples for you guys. Okay, let's see. Let's say that we would have an intervention that all cars must be shared. So then with these 3 words, we can reflect that intervention and see how, like, what is actually being done and who does it affect. So let's say that we would have, within this bigger intervention, we would have an action proposed that, okay, private car sharing pilot at Turku Center. Okay, so could this pilot also be somewhere else and not in the center? Could it be somewhere a bit more like underprivileged areas, as we have also identified those in Turku? And how and which residence groups could be included in the planning of the pilot? And what are the economical considerations of this proposed action? So for instance, could we promote that please share your car, you can actually get money from it? Because we have already this tool, this company in Finland that allows you to do this peer car sharing. And what support would the people need to actually share their cars and trust that service? Intervention number 2, local food to the people. So let's say we would want to bridge the gap between farmers and consumers with pop-up markets and home delivery services. Again, can farmers access these markets? Can they access the delivery services? With what cost? What farmers, what neighborhoods should be included in the planning? And who could benefit economically? Is there another party that is doing the delivery? Can it be the farmer? Can they get more income from that initiative, this intervention? And how can we include the educational or training aspect to this project? So this is kind of the starting point for our interventions. And on top of that, ICLEI is helping us to map more in broad range of the social equity projects of the local communities, the city departments and other actors. In this, I will show you a little bit. We have this, I don't know if you can see anything of this Excel, but we have done just like this kind of straightforward, like I would say maybe even engineering approach. So for instance, we are doing the UN voluntary reporting. So we can take points from there and then see, okay, who are involved in that particular goal, what projects have already been done, what has not been done, who have been included, who has not been included, etc. So this is the more broader view. And then on top of that, another tool we are now developing is that we already have this tool for climate action cards. So we are doing this, we have something like 74 climate actions from different communities and different companies that they basically fill up this card to say what kind of climate actions they have done. So now we are developing this card to include the social equity indicators. So this is also the educational aspect that people start to think of social equity in everything that they do. Okay, so the next steps and challenges. Okay, I have been all the time saying social equity is everybody's business. So how do we actually manage to do so? How do we manage to actually have the educational aspects and kind of also have the peace of mind that, okay, it takes time. The level of detail, that's really a balancing act. Because like it's easy to say, yeah, we have these 3 words of access, participation, and opportunities. And then when we start to discuss the actual interventions, then it's like spreads out quite easily. Then the good thing is that we are actually now collaborating even more with Finnish Innovation Fund and the Finnish Environmental Center, who have been doing good work with circular economy and social equity. So we are getting all the resources together. And then what we want to do is to actually have more concrete case examples and the people themselves speaking with their mouths about what they're doing, what it is in terms of social equity. Okay, this was it. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for bearing with the little messy presentation.
Thank you so much, Lisa. I hope that we can help to answer some of your questions. You've got the right folks on the panel here who can do that, I'm sure. Let's see. I think we will maybe take one more question from our audience. And Kevin, would you like to answer this one? You raised it in the chat box. Maybe you could just expand a little bit more on this.
Yes, is this the one on prioritizing projects and the cost benefit analysis?
Yes.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's a good one. So quantifying all the co-benefits that come with projects and so associated with climate action are difficult, but are, I think, a growing field, and I think are showing some promise presently, and then certainly into the future, we'll probably get better at it. So trying to take into account those additional benefits and including those in the calculation for the cost benefit. So not necessarily having that narrow-minded approach of what is the value of flood reduction versus the cost of implementing something that's going to reduce flooding, but really including all those other benefits as well in that calculus. So what are the job benefits? What are the improvements to biodiversity potentially from increasing tree plantings? Is there energy reduced savings? So really just a myriad of co-benefits, and then really just trying to account for all those in that calculation. So I don't know if you need to separate them and then just overlay them. Also, that's certainly one approach. You could just include more of the benefit calculations within that cost benefit equation.
Great.
I don't know if that answers the question at all. I definitely think that this kind of co-benefit accounting is definitely an area of interest that we should all be pursuing pretty rigorously.
Indeed.
I may also jump in that I think, for instance, if you invest €1 for bicycling lanes, it comes back with €5 with like health benefits, etc. So there's like monetizing these things is like good for decision makers.
Yeah, absolutely.
One thing that I'd add too that we're and this is more of a question back to the audience or folks at ICLEI too, is one of the things that we're interested in is understanding insurance risk, particularly on public assets. So we've seen a lot of modeling, on coastal flooding, on hurricanes, so the insurance industry and the risk modeling industry, and rightfully so, has focused a lot on coastal challenges. But we're really interested in starting to understand what inland modeling looks like. We shared the slides with landslides and things of that nature that we're experiencing as an inland city, and that risk calculation is a little bit different, right, versus a Cat 4, Cat 5 hurricane coming in. So then how do you start to figure that into budgeting and developing a risk management strategy, which many cities do not have, is one of, I think, the frontiers we need to start to step into.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great points, being from the middle of the country here as well, not on a coast, and the unique challenges that every community face. At ICLEI USA, we partner with an organization called Azavia, who has developed a software tool to downscale climate data to a city level. And this is the beginning of the data gathering process to understand what sort of vulnerabilities this particular community can expect. And then building on your stakeholder engagement, bringing insurers in, financial and investment institutions, is definitely a new frontier and a necessary one, for sure. Duncan, we'd like to give you the floor for 10 minutes or so. Tell us about COP26, any reflections on today's panel, sure. And audience, please continue to send your questions. Thanks.
Thanks, Angie, and especially big thanks to Kevin, Grant, and Lisa. I really appreciated the opportunity to hear from your fantastic experience. And I suppose the principal reflection from me on what I've just heard, and I hope the same for the wider audience out there, is that key people focus that all three of you have got. Lisa began her presentation with the words, "Everybody has the right." She ended her presentation with, "We are all in this together." That's absolutely true. And as I reflect on our urban histories, it is the case that our cities, regrettably, are the locus of many of the problems the world is currently experiencing around inequalities, but we are also, in our cities, the source of the only real sustainable solutions to them. And it's in our cities that those solutions will be found, in my view. A couple of things from Glasgow in terms of COP26, and I should just emphasize it's been postponed from November of this year to November 2021. All our planning with the government of the United Kingdom and the UN is for an in-person COP. So I really hope I can welcome you to Glasgow next year. That would be fantastic. And I suppose there are two key messages for Glasgow as host city, which we want to get out to the world and reflect on ourselves. The first, which will come as no surprise because it's the subject matter of our talk today, is that social justice and sustainability must go together. That really, if we are to create a sustainable future for ourselves and our cities, we must be building that on the basis of the just and fair city. And that's something that came strongly from Grant's work around resilience as well in Pittsburgh. I know that resilience grows from that seedbed of justice and fairness within the urban environment. The second big issue for us is that whilst nation states make pledges or fail, I'm afraid to say, to agree all that much, it is cities that are delivering. And, you know, it's that leadership of our mayors and city leaders, like Mayor Peduto, for instance, that's going to make the difference. One of the ironies of the United States perhaps pulling out of the Paris Agreement at a federal level is that as a nation, it may well find that it meets most of those commitments because of action in Buffalo, Denver, Pittsburgh, and states like California and New York and so on. And that's a key narrative we want here in Glasgow to be putting forward between now and COP. I think I was also reflecting on some of the issues that were raised about data there, that actually the smart city agenda, which is often quite opaque and difficult to follow, becomes real when you are talking about the sorts of things which, for instance, my notes from what Grant was talking about, tree canopy cover, temperature, air quality, flood risk, and neighborhood-based inequalities, particularly what that might mean in terms of racial inequalities as well. That all makes it real. That makes it not something on a PowerPoint screen, but something that is a tool for a city conversation, an advocacy tool for communities who then get a hold of open data and can really, you know, put people like me and Grant and others to some serious questioning about what we're doing. I think that's crucial as well. I love the focus that Grant had on the SDGs. We all need to be using them, I think, in an inspired urban conversation amongst both the agencies which serve our people, but with our people especially in their diverse communities across our cities. I think, if I may, I just want to quote a couple of things from a report which we put to a committee this week on Tuesday in Glasgow. It was our Climate Emergency Implementation Plan. And it kind of started with two key values. I just want to quickly quote them to you, if I may. The first is, quote, that actions to address the climate crisis must not further disadvantage people and communities who already experience significant inequalities. It cannot just be about middle-class people cycling around our cities, important though, of course, that is. Secondly, and most significantly, the actions to create a safer and more sustainable city should also be aimed at building a just and more equal city. And I think that goes to the heart of your introductory comments, especially Angie as well. Just one of the things there, when Grant was mentioning air quality, and others have drawn upon that, it's obviously a key urban issue around the whole world, and it's a cause of significant inequalities and of community unrest, quite rightly. One of the very few benefits, one of the small silver linings to the huge leaden cloud of COVID hanging over us has obviously been that we've seen what a city could look like when the air is much cleaner, when we have deprivileged the use of the individual automobile, and when people are walking and cycling. That is a victory gained in a hard way, but one we must retain when we come out of COVID. And one of the key messages, therefore, for COP26 is that as the world, we hope, emerges from the crisis around COVID, which we had not foreseen, we can turn once again to addressing the climate emergency, which we already knew to be looming upon us. And there's a real opportunity, we hope, in Glasgow next year for cities and especially for nations to reset the balance to make that just transition to a safer world. And I do look forward to welcoming you, hopefully in the meantime, but especially at COP in November. I'll stop my comments at that point, Angie, and just pass back to you.
Many thanks, Duncan. And thanks to all of the panelists. We have 3 minutes remaining. Are there any closing thoughts that you'd like to provide? Lisa, let's start with you.
I'm happy. This is my closing thought, because when we all do this together, we will get forward. So thank you for this event and this excellent ideas that I have gotten here a lot. So thank you.
Thank you for your enthusiasm and your wonderful spirit, Lisa. I would never imagine you're an engineer. Grant, how about you?
I would just always just to share. Yeah, it's been great. And you know, it's a good panel when you have a list full of notes that you took from all the other presenters. So it's always good to connect with everyone.
Thank you, Grant. Yeah, I appreciate it. And Kevin, we started with you. Let's end with you.
Sure. Yeah, I just want to thank you all again. This was really great for me to hear from other cities as well. Really fortunate to be a part of this, and really look forward to more engagement with ICLEI in the future. Great.
Thank you all. The slide presentations will be available for attendees. So if you didn't catch all of those notes like Grant did, you'll have an opportunity to go back and take a look at them. Thank you all. Enjoy the rest of your day and enjoy the rest of Daring Cities. Take care.